the forests of Scandinavia are different after dark. Even now, there are places in the north where the trees grow so densely that sunlight barely reaches the ground. Places where lakes stay perfectly still, where the fog moves without wind, and where old people still avoid certain roads at night. Not because of animals, but because of something much older. For centuries, people across Norway, Sweden, Iceland, and Finland told stories about creatures hiding in the wilderness. Not simple monsters, but things that felt connected to the land itself. Today, we call them cryptids. Creatures that exist somewhere between legend and belief. Between folklore and genuine fear. The dead who return from their graves. Spirits that lured travelers beneath black water. Women in the forest with hollow backs and animal tails. Creatures that sat on human chests while they slept, stealing their breath in the dark. And the disturbing part is this. Many of these stories were never treated as myths. People genuinely believed these beings were real. Entire villages feared them. Warnings were passed from parents to children. And some legends became so deeply rooted that traces of them still survive today. Because in the far north, people did not only fear the cold, they feared what might be waiting for them beyond the trees. In Scandinavia, survival was never guaranteed. Winters lasted for months. Villages disappeared beneath snowstorms. People traveled through endless forests, knowing that if something happened, nobody would come looking for them. And in places where nature already felt unforgiving, people feared something even worse than the cold. The Draugr, a creature from Old Norse legend. A corpse that refused to stay dead. The Vikings believed there were worse things than dying in battle. Worse than freezing at sea. Worse than starving during winter. Because sometimes the dead came back. Not as ghosts. Not as spirits trapped between worlds. But as something physical. Something that could open doors. Break bones. Kill livestock, and drag the living into darkness. In Old Norse sagas, Draugr were said to rise from their graves after death, especially if the person had been cruel, greedy, violent, or consumed by hatred while alive. Death did not calm them. It preserved their rage. And unlike modern zombies, the Draugr were intelligent. They remembered who they hated. They protected the treasures buried beside them. And some were believed to grow larger and stronger with every victim they killed. The Vikings often buried important warriors inside massive burial mounds near the sea. Weapons, jewelry, gold, and personal belongings were placed beside the dead, as if preparing them for another life beyond the grave. But some stories warned that certain men should never be buried with honor. Because if hatred followed them into death, something else could return. According to legend, the Draugr did not rot normally. Its body became swollen and dark. Its skin turned black or blue from death. Some sagas describe them as enormous, heavy creatures with unnatural strength. Others claimed their bodies smelled so foul that people could sense a Draugr before ever seeing it. And perhaps most disturbing of all, they were not trapped inside their graves. At night, the Draugr was said to leave its burial mound and wander the land around it. Animals would panic first. Dogs refused to approach certain hills. Horses became violent near ancient graves. People spoke of hearing footsteps outside isolated homes during snowstorms, even when nobody could possibly be out there. In some stories, the Draugr crushed people to death in their sleep. In others, it drove entire families insane through nightmares and fear. One of the most famous examples appears in the saga of Grettir the Strong. A shepherd named Glamour died under mysterious circumstances after ignoring warnings about wandering outside on a dark winter night. Soon after his death, strange things began happening across the valley. Livestock were found mangled. People vanished. Homes no longer felt safe after sunset. Then Glamour returned. Not as a man, but as a Draugr. The saga describes him as enormous, terrifying, and almost impossible to kill. His eyes glowed in the darkness, and anyone who looked at him felt overwhelming dread. Even hardened warriors feared entering his burial place. Eventually, the warrior Grettir confronted the creature in one of the most brutal battles in Norse folklore. Inside the darkness of the tomb, the Draugr fought with inhuman strength. The dead body groaned and snarled like an animal. And even after Grettir finally defeated it, the creature cursed him with fear and misfortune for the rest of his life. That detail is important. Because in Scandinavian folklore, evil was rarely clean or simple. Even surviving contact with darkness could permanently stain a person. And perhaps that is why the Draugr terrified people for centuries. It was not just a monster. It was the fear that hatred does not die peacefully. That violence can survive the grave. That some people become so consumed by greed, cruelty, or rage that even death refuses to take them completely. And in the cold, isolated world of the Vikings, where burial mounds stood alone beneath black skies and endless winters, it was easy to believe that something might still be watching from beneath the earth. The dead were not the only things feared in the north. Across Scandinavia, people also feared the water. Not the sea during storms. Not crashing waves against cliffs. But quiet water. Still lakes hidden between forests. Black rivers disappearing into fog. Places where the world suddenly became silent. Even now, there are lakes in the north that feel strangely untouched. No birds. No movement. Only dark water stretching beneath the trees. And for centuries, people believed some of those places were not empty. They called it the Nøkken, a creature said to live in lonely lakes and deep rivers across Scandinavia. According to legend, the Nøkken often appeared as a man sitting near the water at night, playing music alone in the darkness. A violin drifting through the fog. Soft. Beautiful. Almost hypnotic. And that was what made the story so disturbing. The Nøkken did not hunt through violence. It lured people closer. Imagine hearing music across a lake in the middle of winter. No homes nearby. No lanterns in the distance. Only snow, darkness, and black water beneath the moonlight. And somewhere ahead of you, someone is playing the violin. In old Scandinavian folklore, people believed the sound could pull travelers toward the water without them even realizing it. Children were warned never to follow music near lakes after sunset. Never answer voices coming from the fog. And never wander too close to the shoreline alone. Because according to the legends, that was how people disappeared. Some stories claimed the Nøkken dragged victims beneath the surface with unnatural strength. Others said people entered the water willingly, almost dreamlike, as if they had fallen under some kind of spell. Many were never seen again. And perhaps that is what made the stories survive for so long. Because throughout Scandinavian history, water was genuinely terrifying. Children drowned beneath thin ice. Fishermen vanished in freezing storms. Bodies disappeared beneath black lakes and were never recovered. And in isolated villages surrounded by endless wilderness, fear needed a face. So the stories gave it one. The Nøkken became more than a monster. It became the feeling that something might be waiting beneath still water, watching silently from below. Some versions of the legend became even stranger. In parts of Scandinavia, people believed the Nøkken could transform into a beautiful white horse standing beside the water. Cold mist drifting around its body. Its skin wet as if it had just emerged from the lake itself. Children who climbed onto its back became trapped there instantly. More and more victims would cling to the creature until suddenly, the horse ran straight into the water, and the lake swallowed them all. Other stories describe the Nøkken as almost tragic. Not evil in the way the Draugr was evil. Not driven by rage or hatred, but lonely. A creature forever tied to dark water, music and isolation. And that strange mixture of beauty and horror appears again and again in Scandinavian folklore. The North was not feared only because it was violent. It was feared because it could lure people in. A frozen lake could look beautiful. A voice in the fog could sound comforting. Music drifting through the darkness could feel almost human. Right until the moment someone stepped too close to the water and vanished beneath the surface forever. In Scandinavian folklore, the most dangerous things were not always monsters. Sometimes they looked human. Beyond the lakes and rivers of the north stood endless forests, dark enough to swallow entire roads. Places where travelers vanished for days and sometimes never returned at all. And according to old legends, some people were led there on purpose. They called her the Huldra, a mysterious woman said to live deep within the forests of Scandinavia. At first glance, she appeared almost impossibly beautiful. Long flowing hair, soft eyes, a calm voice drifting through the trees. In some stories, lonely travelers encountered her standing between the pines at sunset, watching silently from the edge of the forest. Others claimed they heard her singing somewhere beyond the darkness, always just far enough away to follow. And that was the danger. Because according to legend, the Huldra wanted people to follow her deeper into the wilderness. Far away from roads, far away from firelight, far away from anything safe. But hidden beneath her beauty, there was always something wrong. In Norway, many legends describe the Huldra with the tail of a cow hidden beneath her dress. Other stories claimed her back was hollow, like the trunk of a rotting tree. A beautiful illusion wrapped around something ancient and unnatural. And in Scandinavian folklore, the forest itself was often treated almost like a living thing. Not peaceful, not welcoming, but endless. Even today, the forests of the north can feel overwhelming. Miles of trees stretching in every direction. Silence so complete it almost feels unnatural. In older centuries, becoming lost there could easily mean death from cold, starvation, or exposure. And because of that, people filled the wilderness with stories. The Huldra became the embodiment of the forest's seduction. The feeling that something beautiful could slowly pull you away from the world you knew. Many legends followed the same terrifying pattern. A man traveling alone through the woods encounters a beautiful woman. She smiles at him, speaks softly, perhaps even seems lonely herself. And for a moment, the forest no longer feels frightening. Then hours pass. The light disappears. The trees begin to look unfamiliar. And suddenly the traveler realizes he has wandered far deeper into the wilderness than he ever intended. Some stories claimed the Huldra simply caused people to become lost forever. Others were far darker. There are legends in which men who followed her were never seen again. Only footprints leading into the forest before vanishing completely beneath the snow. One of the oldest recorded stories comes from rural Norway. A farmer working alone near the forest edge heard a woman singing somewhere between the trees. He followed the voice for what felt like only minutes. When he finally stopped walking, the sun was gone. His farm was nowhere in sight, and the singing had disappeared completely. He was found 3 days later, miles from home, with no memory of where he had been. He never spoke about those 3 days. And he never worked near the forest alone again. And yet not every story portrayed the Huldra as purely evil. In some Scandinavian folk tales, she was described as deeply lonely, a creature trapped between the human world and the wilderness itself. There were even stories claiming that if someone truly loved a Huldra and married her inside a church, her monstrous features would disappear completely. But even those stories carried an unsettling feeling beneath them, because they suggested something dangerous could stand beside you, looking entirely human. And perhaps that is why the Huldra survived in folklore for so long. She was more than a monster hiding in the woods. She represented the fear of becoming lost, not only physically, but emotionally. The fear of following beauty so far into darkness that you can no longer find your way back home. Not every horror in Scandinavian folklore waited outside. Some were believed to enter the home itself, to stand beside the bed in the middle of the night. And according to old legends, some horrors could follow you into your sleep. They called it the Mare, a supernatural being feared across Scandinavia for centuries. The creature people once blamed for nightmares. In fact, many historians believe the modern word nightmare comes directly from these ancient legends. But the Mare was never imagined as a simple bad dream. People believed it was real. According to Scandinavian folklore, the Mare visited sleeping victims at night and sat on their chest while they slept. Its weight made breathing difficult. Its presence filled rooms with overwhelming dread. And no matter how desperately the victim tried to move, their body refused to respond. Long before modern science understood sleep paralysis, people across Northern Europe described terrifyingly similar experiences. Waking suddenly in darkness, unable to move, feeling pressure on the chest, sensing that something hostile was standing nearby. Some claimed they saw a shadow watching from the corner of the room. Others believed an old woman sat on top of them while they struggled to breathe. Many described hearing whispers, footsteps, or low breathing somewhere in the darkness around the bed. And in isolated Scandinavian villages, those experiences became folklore. The Mare was blamed for exhaustion, nightmares, and even unexplained illness. People tried countless ways to protect themselves from it. In parts of Scandinavia, knives were placed beneath pillows. Certain herbs were hung inside homes. Some believed sleeping with tangled clothing or crossed limbs could attract the creature during the night. And perhaps most disturbing of all, the Mare did not feel impossible. Unlike giant monsters or undead warriors, the Mare reflected something deeply human. The terror of waking in darkness and losing control of your own body. Even now, centuries later, people around the world still report experiences almost identical to the old legends. They wake frozen in bed, unable to scream, unable to breathe properly, certain that something is standing beside them in the dark. And for a brief moment, the distance between modern science and ancient folklore collapses completely. Because whatever the Mare truly was, the fear it left behind never disappeared. It simply changed its name. Of all the places in the north that people feared, none swallowed more lives than the sea. Cold, black, endless. For Viking sailors and fishing villages across Norway and Iceland, the ocean was both survival and death. Entire ships vanished into northern storms without leaving a trace. men disappeared beneath freezing waves and were never seen again. And the stories that came back from the water were unlike anything told on land. In 1752, a Norwegian bishop named Erik Pontoppidan wrote down the Kraken not as myth, but as fact. In his official Natural History of Norway, he described the creature with the calm certainty of a man documenting something real, something that sailors had witnessed, something that existed beneath the water whether people chose to believe it or not. And what he described was unlike anything else in the natural world. A creature so massive that entire ships could disappear beneath it. Not attacked, swallowed. In Scandinavian folklore, the Kraken was often described as something closer to a living island than an ordinary creature. Some legends claimed its body was so enormous that sailors mistook its back for land rising from the ocean. And according to the stories, that mistake was fatal. The sea around the creature would begin to change first. Fish vanished from the water. The waves became strangely calm. And then, something moved beneath the surface. One old story tells of a fishing crew drifting through heavy fog somewhere off the coast of Norway. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The sea was calm. Too calm. No wind touched the sails. No birds circled overhead. Even the waves against the ship had gone strangely quiet. Then the men noticed the fish. Hundreds of them rising desperately toward the surface around the boat, as if something beneath the ocean was driving them upward in terror. And then, the water began to move. Not like waves. Something underneath them was rising. Slowly. The ship tilted violently to one side. Ropes snapped. Men grabbed the rails as dark shapes emerged beside the vessel, larger than tree trunks, dripping freezing seawater back into the ocean. Tentacles. The crew later claimed the creature was so enormous they could not see where its body ended beneath the black water. Only movement. Endless movement beneath the sea. Sailors described enormous arms wrapping around ships and pulling them apart piece by piece. Wood splintering beneath impossible force. Masts collapsing into freezing water, while entire crews vanished screaming into the darkness below. And perhaps the most terrifying part of the legend was how powerless people felt against it. In old Scandinavian stories, the Kraken was never portrayed as a simple animal. It felt ancient, something connected to the ocean itself. A force hidden beneath endless black water. And when you imagine what life truly looked like for sailors in the north, the fear becomes understandable. Picture standing aboard a wooden ship in the middle of the Norwegian Sea. No land. No lights. Only freezing wind and darkness stretching endlessly around you. Then suddenly, the ocean becomes silent. No gulls overhead. No crashing waves. Only the sound of water slowly shifting beneath the hull. And somewhere below the ship, something enormous is rising toward the surface. For centuries, stories like these spread through harbors, fishing villages, and isolated northern coastlines. Sailors carried them from port to port until the Kraken became one of the most feared creatures in Scandinavian folklore. And even today, there is something deeply unsettling about the ocean at night. Because unlike the forests or the lakes, the sea never truly lets you see what exists beneath it. Only darkness. Only depth. And the terrifying feeling that something ancient could still be moving far below the surface. Completely unseen. Today, most people describe these stories as folklore. Old myths created to explain death, isolation, and fear. And perhaps that is true. The Draugr may have been born from humanity's fear that hatred can survive beyond the grave. The Nøkken from the terror of dark water and the people who vanished beneath it. The Huldra from the endless forests where travelers disappeared without a trace. The Mare from the helpless horror of waking in darkness, unable to move or breathe. And the Kraken from the unimaginable emptiness of the northern sea. But what makes Scandinavian folklore feel different from so many other legends is how close these fears still feel. Because the landscapes that created these stories still exist. The forests are still there. The lakes remain black and silent beneath the fog. Winter still swallows entire landscapes in darkness for months at a time. And far out at sea, the ocean still hides everything beneath its surface. Even now, there are places in the north where the world can suddenly feel ancient again. Places where roads vanish between endless trees. Where the air becomes completely silent before snowfall. Where dark water reflects nothing but the sky above it. And standing alone in places like that, it becomes easier to understand why people once believed something was waiting for them in the cold. Not because they were foolish, but because deep in the wilderness of the north, nature itself can begin to feel alive, watching silently from the darkness, waiting beneath the water, walking through the forests, resting below the earth, or moving somewhere far beneath the sea, where no human eyes can follow. And perhaps that is why these legends survived for so long. Because the forgotten horror of the north never truly disappeared.